All right, welcome in. New edition of the Winning Plays podcast. My name is Brian Robb. Very excited to have Taylor Snow of Celtics.com. Great reporter over there for how many years now, Taylor? How many years have you been with the
I'm
team?
in my seventh season.
Wow, time
Yep,
flies, but
gone by fast.
it is. And but yeah, Taylor, he's a great follow on Twitter at Taylor C Snow. Is that correct? Am I
Yep,
getting that right?
correct. Yep,
Yeah.
Taylor
So
season.
if you're not following there, make sure you're following him. He's always tweeting out great numbers, great clips,
A lot
in
of
real
bad
time.
ones.
Yeah, a lot of bad ones, a lot of bad puns, terrible jokes. You can give him plenty of crap for that. But today we had to bring him aboard because listen, this Celtics team is rolling right now. We're recording this on a Friday, straight out of the All Star break, where the C's really took care of business against the Brooklyn Nets on Thursday night. They've won, I believe, 10 out of 11 and 17 of 22 overall, going back to the beginning of January,
Yep.
and look like honestly the best team in the NBA for the 2022 calendar year so far. So, Taylor, I'll start with you this. Health is the easy choice in terms of what has led to this turnaround. Um, and just this play in the last 6 weeks. But beyond that, what has kind of stood out to you the most from an encore perspective in terms of what has really turned this team into kind of a run of the mill team to one of the East Elite?
Yeah, well, I mean, building off the health, it's just really the continuity of that starting group. Um, I think that starting lineup, when the Celtics lost their first 3 games of the year with that starting lineup, and then since then they've gone 18-3, and I think they're going at a record pace for net rating, certainly the highest of any 5-man group over the last 25 years or so. Um, but I mean, it seems like at the moment on the defensive end, there's no weakness there, and it's been like that for a couple months now. And it seems like the offense is finally coming around as well. They're finding better shots. They're not dribbling as much. So I mean, it all seems to be coming together finally.
It is, and like to your point on like the starting five defense, you could see. I mean, Brooklyn obviously was very undermanned on Thursday night, but you could see them just like run their offense at points in that game and just be like it going absolutely nowhere because the Celtics switching and the defenders they have on the floor is just like, okay, great. Yeah, you just like did a dribble handoff like right into Smart. And now you're being led into right into like Brown or Horford, whoever.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and now there's 5 seconds on the shot clock and you're kind of all out of luck at that point.
And I think a lot of people are pointing out how, they're beating up on undermanned teams or bad teams. But I mean, if you watch them play, it's clear that their connectivity on the defensive end, I mean, it would be working against any team right now.
Right.
It's just there's no real getting through to them. Like I said, there's no weakness. It's 5 guys that can switch. You got Robb in the back there who just makes it easier on everybody. So, I mean, you can say that they're beating up on bad teams, but earlier in the season, they weren't doing that. And they weren't holding on to these leads like they are now. So it's clear that they've made a ton of progress there.
There's no question about that. And you look at, I mean, from the, I mean, you had the stat last night, I think. This was the first time in NBA history a team on the, I know the NBA, the TNT broadcast had the plus 25, yeah, first team in NBA history to hit that 25-point marker for 4 road games in a row, and they didn't get it, but Taylor was on the spot, said, you know what, doesn't matter, 23 plus or
23
23
points. Yeah.
points or more.
Yeah. I don't know if Aaron Neesmith knew about that record, dribbled out the shot clock there, but I don't think they would have been happy at him for taking a shot. But yeah, I mean, and not just that, it's the other stat I tweeted out, which is one of the most absurd stats I've seen in a while, was how they haven't trailed on the road all month. They've had 5 straight wire to wire wins. The last deficit they faced on the road was January 29th in New Orleans when they went down 2-0. So essentially 6 straight wire to wire wins. But I mean, I don't care who you're playing or how hot you are. That's just unheard of, especially because first basket of the game is kind of up for grabs anyway. So the fact that they got first basket in each of those games and hung on to the lead is just insane. I mean, that has to be a record, especially doing it on the road.
Yeah, that's just absolutely, I mean, in today's NBA, that just doesn't happen, period.
Right. And then playing in
Because,
Detroit tomorrow, Indy on Sunday, they could keep that going for sure.
right. even though I don't know the Pistons, this new a healthy Pistons squad suddenly looks like okay, this is they can at least they beat the Cavs the other night, so that's not
Yeah,
going to be they're certainly not the worst team in the NBA right now despite their record.
they've had the tendency to beat good teams really throughout the season, but now it seems like things are kind of coming together. Obviously, Cade Cunningham is looking really good lately. Um, but yeah, that loss before the break obviously hurt a little bit. But at the same time, I don't think it's always such a bad thing dropping a game right before the break because it kind of festers in your mind for a week. And they came back to practice Wednesday. Al Horford said everybody was really focused and carried into shoot around, carried into the game. So they look like the same dominant team, the Celtics, last night.
Yeah, and I actually wrote about this last night a little bit, just in terms of I think Ime Udoka's kind of flown under the radar within this like stretch. Everything is coming together around the court, but I think Ime in the it was up and down the first couple months of the season for everyone. I think on the roster, and sometimes people went after coaching decisions a little bit, but I think in this stretch the level of urgency in these games, like in the stat you just talked about, like if you're leading 5 straight games, that tells you a lot of just about how strong that buy-in is right now of
Yeah.
him, and he just seems between that and the defensive tweaks. I think he's kind of worked in with Robb kind of as a rover, and sticking with a tighter rotation. It just seems like he's pushing all the right buttons right now.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, it seems like, when a team's doing bad, the coaches always want getting the heat, but when they're doing well, they don't really get enough credit. And I think that he was facing kind of some unfair criticism at the start. People were getting a little impatient, which I know it's Boston. People get a little impatient when teams aren't winning consistently, but um, he faced a good amount of adversity at the start, just with all the health issues and implementing a new system. I mean, that takes time, but I mean, he's clearly improved as it has gone on, just like a bunch of these players have. So he deserves just as much of the credit.
And now, coming out of the trade deadline, it looks like he is also going to have some more options now with
Yeah,
in terms of nightly. He has, obviously Derrick White has slotted in. I think everyone has to be as pleased with the fit as you would hope for. Honestly, even like working it better than you could imagine out of the gate, and that's probably just a tribute to White as a player, and obviously him knowing Ime before, so knowing what he wants. But you have him, you have Grant Williams, and then off the bench now you have Peyton Pritchard or Aaron Nesmith. I feel like that's going to be an interesting you know choice on a nightly basis in terms of matchups or whoever kind of has it going. And then you have some extra depth in Daniel Theis, who didn't play until late against the Nets, but that's certainly a player that I think when you're looking at minutes for Al Horford and Rob Williams going forward, like I'm guessing that he's going to be in that rotation more often than not, just to keep those guys healthy during the stretch run here.
right. Yeah, and we didn't really see much of Daniel last night until garbage time, but with I mean, obviously Horford's an older guy, and Rob's had some injury issues. So I mean, you never know what could happen. They could need him down the stretch, and he's a guy that will should be able to slide right in. I mean, his versatility fits right in with what they do on the defensive end. But yeah, I mean, their top seven right now is set in stone. It's kind of a question of who's going to be that eighth guy that steps up. Will be Pritchard or Neesmith. I know they've both had couple of solid games lately, but it'd be great to see one or both of those guys get hot now at the end of the season.
How pumped do you think Tice was just after this trade in terms of like you go from Houston where things obviously just didn't work for him. Like it was a kind of a weird signing for them in the first place this offseason because they're obviously going very young and had a bunch of bigs regardless.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, he clearly didn't want to leave to begin with. I mean, he loved it here, and so many of the guys loved him. I know Rob loves him, and uh, Tatum, and but I mean, to go from that situation in Houston, I mean, it's like night and day coming from that organization to this one. And I think it's a special place for him just because the Celtics, found him overseas, gave him a chance. So I think he has, special ties and really appreciates this organization.
what have your written impressions of White so far?
I mean, I think he's been a great fit so far. Uh, I know first half of the season, Dennis and Josh both, they both made solid contributions, and Josh was, I would say he was a surprise in how well he played on both ends of the floor. But I think Derrick, um, he adds a little bit more offensive versatility. His playmaking should be, big for them in the playoffs and down the stretch. And defensively, I don't think I was even aware just how strong he was on that end. And it seems like Smart is really excited to play with him in the backcourt. And I mean, he just makes that defense so much stronger, especially at the end of games.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I feel like he was in on the defensive White. He never played on any like the great teams in San Antonio. I feel like he just missed that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, he played on, he's played in the playoffs a few times, and obviously they've been kind of moving more into rebuilding mode down there in recent years. So he played, I think, with like DeRozan and some guys, maybe a year of Kawhi, but they were probably hurt that year. But the Spurs just have never been a great defense in the last like 4 or 5 years. So I feel like it's easy for guys like that just to get lost in the shuffle. But then, you realize, yeah, he was on that World Cup team in like whatever it was, 2019, and there's a reason for that. And you can clearly see now, like in terms like of a glue guy, that yeah, he's not gonna, you know, do anything. Numbers aren't gonna jump off the page by any means. But if you want just that kind of ability to fit in on either end of the floor, you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, this works.
And the funny thing was how before January, the Celtics had never made a trade with San Antonio. It was the only team that they'd never made a trade with, and then they've made two in the past month because that's where they sent Juancho.
Right.
Uh, and it's just clearly, um, I think White was maybe an underrated part of that San Antonio team. Like you said, his defense kind of flew under the radar, and obviously Ime was in tune to what he's capable of, having been there since Derrick came into the league. And he's a guy who's really, I mean, he's got a great background as well. I know he started out at a D3 school, and for 3 years before going to D1 for his last year, and then made it to the NBA. So, he's clearly a hard worker, and I know Ime appreciates those types of players.
Yeah, it's pretty good intel. I mean, the fact that Ime has been around the league so much in the all these, whether it's San Antonio, Philadelphia, or Brooklyn in the last 3 years, you can get a lot of, just when you're making moves for guys, it's a pretty useful tool to have. Just that,
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, let's just go talk to Ime. Let's see what kind of guy Derek is. Yeah, yeah, he had him for 4 years, whatever.
for sure.
But it's it's going to be, and one thing I do like, and I think to Ime's credit during this run is that he just threw him in the deep end from like
Yeah,
day one out of the game. I feel like some coaches, even still, if you know a guy, like are a little hesitant with that. Like, okay, like we don't want to throw him in crunch time. Like, he doesn't know the plays or whatever yet. Like, let's kind of ease him in a little bit. But even in, against the Nuggets and the Hawks, that the weekend after the trade deadline, it was like, nope, like we're gonna roll with him for the last like 18 minutes of these games. And he kind of, and those are all these games are really important for them at this point from a standing standpoint, because they have so much, ground to make up in the tight Eastern Conference. So that them being able to kind of pull that off is could come in handy really big time in the long run here.
I think we were all kind of shocked that he played right off the bat too. Because I mean, I remember like I didn't even find out until like 15 minutes before
Oh yeah, that's right. They were waiting on it.
Yeah, yeah, because like all the physical stuff had to go through, and oftentimes even then, a guy won't be thrown right in there. Certainly not for whatever he played, 25 minutes or so. Um, but yeah, I mean, it helps that he knows how Ime is as a coach, and also just having played with some of these guys a little bit in the past with Team USA. I mean, it's not like he was going into like a foreign locker room. Um, and I mean, he went in his first couple games, just hit the ground running, and he's clearly a very, he's got a high basketball IQ. So, it doesn't surprise me that a guy like that would be able to do so well so quickly with a team.
All right, Taylor. So right now the Celtics, as we record this, are just one game out of the fifth seed right now, I believe. They're
Like that.
closing in on the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah. I know they're in sixth right now. By the end of the weekend, if everything goes perfectly, they could be third. Um,
Right.
so it's crazy how tight it is right now.
It is. So you have the Bulls and the Heat are up top, with a 4 and 5 game edged over the Celtics. But behind that, the Bucks, the Sixers, the Cavs are all kind of crushed together there, just ahead of the Celtics here. We just found out today the Raptors are right behind the Celtics, but OG Anunoby has a broken finger apparently, so his status moving forward is in question. We know Brooklyn is going to get a lot healthier soon, but the timetable on those guys returning to the floor is still unclear, and their schedule is not easy coming up for the Nets. They're playing on Toronto and a lot of other tough teams, so
Yeah,
um,
and I know
they're
that
they,
the Celtics have one of the easier schedules, I believe, to end
right.
the season. That's going to obviously help them out.
So what do you think realistically here? What do you think? How high do you think the Celtics could get in the East standings here? What's an attainable goal for them if they? I mean, obviously, if they keep playing like this, like anything is possible in terms of getting up to 2 or 1. But what do you think is realistic with their schedule here?
I mean, just the way they've been playing and the schedule coming up, I don't see them finishing any lower than fourth at this point. I mean, it's the teams at the top right now. Um, I'm not sure who's it. I think Chicago's dealing with a couple injuries too. Um,
Yeah,
but
they're getting a couple guys back, like Caruso, and
yeah,
should be coming back soon. They just and Levine just got back too.
yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of people are still thinking it's Brooklyn, Philly, Milwaukee, but the thing with Brooklyn and Philly, I mean, they have, they just made these two huge franchise altering moves, and they're great players, but you don't know how quickly they're going to be able to establish chemistry and just how those pieces will fit. Um, but I mean, what we do know is the Celtics are rolling right now, and this is the type of momentum that could carry on for quite some time. So I mean, I think fourth would be like at the bottom, I think, for me. But I mean, it's so close all the way to the top that I mean they could finish second, first, maybe.
And we talk about that schedule. Like after this road trip this weekend here, they don't really have one. They have only two major road trips for the rest of the season. One is that West Coast trip in the middle of March, which starts tough with like Golden State, but then you got Sacramento, Denver, who obviously will probably still be without Murray and Porter at that point, and OKC. So that's a 2-2 or 3-1 trip there is very within the realm of possibility. And then you go to the last week of the year, with the probably the toughest trip of the year, the Chicago, Milwaukee, Memphis. But at that point, you wonder with seeding in both conferences whether that'll be locked up for any of those teams involved, and that could make those games like obviously not as tough as they would be in the middle of the year.
Yeah, yeah. I think the Celtics were fortunate to get such a difficult portion of their schedule out of the way in December. I mean, that was like a ridiculous month. I think every single team they faced was 500 or above, and
Yeah.
obviously it killed them because I mean they were depleted with injuries and health issues, and it showed in their record that month. But it should pay off. Hopefully the last part of the year for them.
And what do you? I mean, you look at the playoff picture right now. Where, what kind of matchup do you think? What kind of path do you think could work for the Celtics in terms of fear? We're gonna have obviously months and months to look at this stuff, but beyond like part of it's like, oh yeah, that'd be good to get Cleveland or Chicago, but then you look at the way like Chicago's playing this year and the way DeRozan's playing, it's like, oh, I don't know, like you gonna ask for a team like that, like in
Yeah,
a first or second round matchup? Like it's so tight right now. It's gonna be. I don't think they'll be lucky if they get a favorable first round matchup at all, if even if they're get
yeah.
up to that 3 or 4 seed.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to gauge the competition this year just because of how, I mean, so many teams have been inconsistent and, standings are so tight. I mean, I think most people wouldn't want to face those powerhouses like Brooklyn or Philly or Milwaukee right off the bat. But I mean, Cleveland. I know there weren't much expectations for Cleveland coming in, but they've been kind of a little scary this year. I mean, with Jared Allen and Mobley up front, and even all the injuries they've dealt with. I mean, that would be a tough matchup, but it's hard to say. Like you can't really be certain about any matchup going in.
You really can't. And I mean, who knows what these teams are going to look like? I mean, we'll have a lot more to go off of in the coming weeks as Philly starts to look like themselves. Brooklyn gets all these guys back. I will be very curious to see just how those guys integrate into the fold. And then Chicago, like Lonzo Ball's another guy too that's supposed to come back for them. So that's all these teams could look and be playing a lot different from there. But the Celtics, to their credit, like they have everything they need right now. Like White, I think as far as an addition goes, is as easy as to slot in as probably any player in the league, given his background in Fidoka and just the type of player he is. And and we already talked about Theis. Like Theis, it might be a new system for him, but he knows how to play with all these guys already. So that kind of learning curve, I wonder how much that kind of factored into Brad Stevens' decision making at the trade deadline, being like when he decided to pull the trigger on him at the last minute, like, hey, we know this guy, but we also know that like there's not going to be a learning curve with him either, bringing him back in here.
Yeah, and I mean, some of these teams might have bigger stars or whatever, but I can't think of a deeper 6 or 7 man rotation than what the Celtics have, and then um, you know Tatum tends to come on strong at the end of the season too. So I mean, if they're healthy, I mean, last year as we knew they were without Jalen in the playoffs. Robb was dealing with health issues, but I mean, if you got this team fully healthy going into the playoffs, I don't think any team would feel comfortable facing them.
What else? What else has stood out to you or surprised you, if anything, about this team in the last 6 weeks here? I mean, we know, the defense has been historic numbers. We know the starting five numbers have been kind of out of control. But as anyone within that group, when you like have kind of dug into the numbers, really been like, wow, this is like I didn't expect this from this guy, at least yet.
Um, I mean, at this point, it's not surprising me as much, but just just to see how Robb continues to grow. I mean, I feel like his presence is a little underappreciated, or well, not with it. I mean, Celtics fans love him. I know. Um, I don't want to step into Forsberg's.
Yeah, no, like, Forger's going to come after you now. No, this is, but we haven't mentioned him in this podcast, which I think is also to your point. Like it is kind of taking him for granted at this point. Like, oh yeah, just another double last night.
Yeah,
Like, oh,
but it's just I don't know if it's that widely noticed yet around the league just how valuable he is. I mean, Tatum is obviously the best player on this team, the MVP of this team, but it seems like Robb has been kind of the most important piece or the X factor just because when he's out there, the defense just seems to be so much more intense and locked in. And Marcus was saying yesterday how having Robb in there as a rim protector just really makes everybody else's job easier because they can pressure on the perimeter and rely on him up in the back. But um, it's just he just keeps getting better and better, and I think it would be a crime if he didn't make one of the all defensive teams at this point, just being probably the most important defensive player on the best defensive team.
yeah. I mean, this year, that voting will be fascinating if they make it up to number one in team defense. Like obviously, like Smart, see, it feels like a given, but then you look at Robb, you look at I think even like Tatum. I mean, you could make a case honestly for any
Yeah,
if
I mean
not
the entire starting group is just elite defenders, and
right.
I know Smart gets a lot of the credit and deservedly so. I mean, he's one of the best, but Tatum and Brown are both elite perimeter defenders as well. And I know Tatum at the beginning of the season said his goal was to make all defensive team, and he actually leads the league in defensive win shares this year. So I mean, he's doing his job on that end as well.
And I mean, Rob Williams most improved player is that? I mean, he was really good last year, so it's kind of like, Like the numbers aren't that much change except the fact he's playing so much more. But
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the numbers, you wouldn't think it. I mean, his numbers have improved, obviously, but usually most improved, a guy will, his points will go up by 10 or something like that. But just in terms of his impact, I think that's what should, you know, be considered. Because it's just like I said, there's so much better when he's out there, and giving him this increase in minutes this season has just made so much of a difference in his development too.
that honestly had probably is like one of the biggest surprises for me that he's been able to handle those like the minute load.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
it is skyrocketed, and he's been able to stay out on the court.
yeah, yeah, because as we all know, he's dealt with some injury issues in the past, and he's had a few nicks and bruises this year, but he hasn't really missed a lot of time, like consecutive games or anything like that. And I think Ime was saying yesterday how he seems to, with this extra workload, he's kind of built up more of a tolerance to that kind of stuff. So I mean that's huge. I mean, having him healthy is so critical for them if they want to make a deep run.
And well, we're gonna see what happens here. We got I think what 21 games left here.
Yeah.
Um, it'll continue again this week. They'll be coming fast and furious, and we'll be seeing if they can push their way back up to the top half of the Eastern Conference playoff picture down the stretch here. But want to thank Taylor for hopping on. Make sure you're following him at Twitter at Taylor C Snow. He's got important people like Jason Tatum retweeting his stuff regularly. So, um, he's well worth the follow. Make sure you hit him up on there.
All right. Thanks, B. Rob.
But in the
Glad to be
meantime,
here.
yep, nope.
Couldn't have spent the snowy day in any better way.
Exactly. This is what snow days are for. Not shoveling, just podcasting instead. But make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the Winning Plays Pod. You can follow us on Twitter as well at Winning Plays Pod. And we'll be catch up with you guys again next week.